thank you. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just looking at the poll over here. It looks like the majority of everyone is more interested in blockchain, not so much DevOps, not so much modern cloud solutions, which is perfect. I mean, this is what we do. We're a blockchain system integrator, and for more questions around what that is, we'll show you in the next couple slides. But we're going to have a heavy focus over here with regards to blockchain. And what we aim to do by the end of this presentation is really showcase how you can use these project management processes, this evolution of project management, how it went from, waterfall style all the way to agile. Now we're at DevOps right now, and you can use all these modern cloud solutions that we have available to us to implement blockchain applications. This is where the rubber meets the road. So we're going to go ahead and get started over here. And again, thank you so much for joining. Just a couple things about us so that you understand some of our competencies and who we are in general. We are Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud, and IBM technology professionals. We have expertise across the entire stack of these technologies. With regards to blockchain, we're members of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We're certified by the Linux Foundation. We're Corda certified and Corda partners. We provide blockchain network development and administration. And then, of course, we have some other competencies that are not blockchain related, but everything's all intertwined, as you'll see throughout this presentation. So we provide full service IoT support, data analytics and BI reporting, Microsoft AI platform and machine learning, system integrations, and of course, full stack web and mobile development, and this DevOps practice along with cloud infrastructure. This slide right here is going to show you exactly kind of some of the pieces that we're going to be talking about today. So what it is that we do, we provide organizations with blockchain services, with modern cloud and on-prem solutions. And we also help out by educating, by providing these workshops. I'll get to more of the workshops in a second, but what you're going to see is before we get to the blockchain services and before we start implementing some of these cloud solutions, these workshops are really helpful as they help you throughout this ideation stage. So we provide this blockchain immersion that helps out with the blockchain 101. We have demo applications for you to put your hands on and kind of start generating this aha moment. Once you get that, then we'd like to move into the use case analysis. So, your business may be thinking about, well, is blockchain right for me? I think blockchain makes sense in a bunch of different areas and a bunch of different business departments. This is where we spend some time and we help you understand and shortlist and make sense if blockchain is right for that particular type of use case. We also provide a discovery day, which is like our immersion and the use case analysis, all wrapped up into one big event where you can bring your stakeholders on and we can help explain everything. This is where you can really discover the value that blockchain can bring. We also provide some other workshops, such as how blockchain and IoT make sense when they work together, and how blockchain and AI, what type of use cases you can come out of there. And then, of course, there's blockchain dashboard in a day. With regards to this particular presentation, we can take a look at the first two columns. So the blockchain services and the modern cloud and on-prem solutions. Specifically for this webinar, we'll be covering POC and MVP development. Obviously, POC is when you're first building out and you're trying to prove out your value. Then you have your MVP development. Then you go into your continuous integration and deployment, where you're making changes based on feedback that you're getting from stakeholders, et cetera. Smart contract development and auditing. So understanding what it takes to develop smart contracts, auditing them, making sure that they're passing specific tests, making sure that they are compliant with the regulatory compliances that you're looking for. Obviously, we're going to get into this: mobile and web UI UX development, solution testing, monitoring, and reporting. And then when we get to the modern cloud solutions, see, for this particular webinar, what I'm going to be focusing on is blob storage, database, data warehouse, data lake, etc. Kubernetes orchestration, Docker containers. They also have a Docker swarm at the same time. Infrastructure as a code. For those that don't know what infrastructure as a code is, or maybe IAC, that stands for being able to deploy a script that launches all the resources that you need without having to manually configure everything, right? So you launch a script, everything launches in the virtual machines that you want them to launch in, and your team is up and running. And then, of course, microservices, which is a fairly, I guess you could say this is a fairly new architecture of developing applications, and we'll explain what that is over the next couple of slides. And line of business applications, of course, last but not least, let's not forget about this one. Line of business applications, right? You probably have some sort of ERP system, inventory management system, some sort of CRM, something where you want to be able to attach blockchain to, and this is where this is going to come in from. It kind of helps at the very beginning, especially when we're talking about these real life blockchain experiences, when we talk about some of the example that we have with our clients and our blockchain projects. So for example, we have one with transportation, ocean freight logistics, sending the bill of lading over. Aircraft manufacturing, being able to have this parts track and trace. Automobile manufacturing, having an invoice reconciliation solution. Insurance, being able to have this policy creation and settlements claim. And I believe that the claim to fame that we have right now is that we have this proof of certificate authenticity. It'll be one of the world's first B2C private blockchain solutions in the quality assurance industry, and scheduled to be released from our client over here in Q2 2019. So we're very excited about that one. So let's get into the agenda over here. I just want to be mindful of the time. So we'll be talking about a brief overview of DevOps and modern cloud solutions. It just helps to set the stage on that, because when we get into this brief overview of blockchain, we're going to kind of tie it all together when we get to the next section where we deconstruct blockchain applications. Then we get into the real life blockchain application implementation consideration. So again, we're going to take you through kind of a brief overview, and then we're going to funnel down and try to get more specific. So brief overview of DevOps and modern cloud solutions. Project methodologies are really everything. I mean, you know, when you're thinking about implementing a project or implementing an application or just doing some sort of, you know, project, if you will, you know, without some sort of proven methodology, the chances of your project succeeding dramatically decrease, right? So at the very beginning of project methodology, there was a waterfall. Methodology, right? So waterfall methodology basically said, all right, we know what the entire project's going to be. We're going to plan it. We're going to design it. We're going to build it. We're going to test it after we build it. We're going to deploy it. We're done. Everything should be good. And then as the time kind of went along, and now we get into the 2001 time frame, and people are starting to develop more software, more applications. A bunch of people got together and decided to make this manifesto, this agile manifesto. And they said, you know what, this waterfall style doesn't really work for us, right? Because we can plan all the way to deploy, but you know, what happens when someone decides that we need to change a piece of the architecture within our software? Or maybe a bug is found. What are we gonna have to do? We're gonna have to tear it down and rebuild it? They said, no, here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna define it, we're gonna build it, we're gonna release it. We're not gonna make it a very long process. We're gonna probably do this in sprints or iterative designs in every 2 weeks or so. Then we're gonna go back and then we're gonna redo it again. So every single time that we make a release, we're gonna capture the feedback and then we're gonna go back and define and build and release. And for those that are involved with agile methodology, you know, what we see is that there's this backlog of all these work items, right? So when there's an issue, you put that backlog, put the work item in the backlog, and then you go ahead and you pick that up. So the backlog will be part of the define phase. Then as technology advanced, and obviously we want to do things quicker, we want to do things better, we want to be able to automate certain things. That's where the DevOps practice came in. The DevOps practice has been around, let's say, for maybe about 10 years, and it's just It's just, you know, in my opinion, it's catching on mainstream more and more and more. And this is where we get to our continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? So we still have the same thing. If you look at the left-hand side, we start with planning, then we move to coding, then we test and build it. And then when we release it, then we monitor it, and then we respond and we learn, and we do it all over again. So what's different from DevOps and Agile, it's kind of like an evolution. So let's dive into this just for 1 second, right? And what we see is that when we have this continuous integration and continuous deployment, this has really been the transition from Agile. When we want to really, you know, check in code, and each chunk is tested and it's integrated several times a day, right? But when you're testing it and when you're committing your code, what they've realized is they said, hey, you know what? We can automate certain pieces of this. So we're going to automate the testing and the building, and then we're going to automate the deployment, right? So there's certain technology that has advanced, where you may have heard of a CI pipeline and a CD pipeline, and we'll get into what those are in just a second. But essentially, you know, in the old days of Agile, right, when there was a new feature that we needed to work on, when there was a bug, you would then put that sticky note up on that Kanban board, and someone from the dev team would go pick that out. They would start to, you know, code it, and when the coding is done, they go ahead and they move that sticky tab or sticky note over to the next swim lane, if you will. And then, you know, the tester has to go and take that sticky pad, and then they go and they test it manually. And then once that's done, then, you know, they move that over to the next swim lane, and then that code has to be deployed, and et cetera. Continuous integration and continuous deployment allows for the automation of these tests and automation of these releases. So if you know in advance what you need to test for, and we'll talk about some of these things we need to test for, you can automate those tests using infrastructure as a code, so that you're testing on the right things. And certain tools like Azure DevOps, for example, has this built-in memory that you can launch a virtual machine when you're doing your testing, and you can destroy the virtual machine at the same time after you're done with the testing to kind of keep it cost efficient. Same thing with the releasing. So before you release code to a production environment for a second, you may want to now, you know, test it again, and you may want to deploy it to a specific environment. Again, this can all be automated. All right. So now let's move on to modern cloud solution examples. And by no means, this isn't all of them, right? This isn't everything that a modern cloud solution provider will be able to provide to a client. But here's what we'll be talking about on some of these next couple slides. So for example, there's Kubernetes. And Kubernetes, as defined by the website, it's a portable, extensible, open source platform for managing and containerizing workloads and services. And it also allows for these different containers to be able to talk to each other. Orchestration is a really big piece. And when we get onto Docker, Docker is, you know, a really popular solution. It's a very popular tool that you use to create, deploy, and run these applications that are using the containers. And what's so interesting about the container is that the containers allow developers to package up an application with everything that you need in there, all your dependencies, all your libraries, et cetera, and then you ship everything out. What's the benefit of that is that it runs on every machine. So you don't have to make sure that when you migrate your solution or your container to whatever virtual machine or whatever machine you're using, it just always works because the Docker container has everything that you need. And Kubernetes allows for the orchestration of these sort of Docker containers so that you can make these containers talk to each other. Docker also has a swarm as well, which kind of acts as an orchestration. But there's been a lot of talk that Kubernetes orchestration is much more robust than Docker, but I guess that's a personal preference. Microservices. Microservices is a really interesting cloud solution, but it's not a cloud solution per se, right? It's more of a cloud architecture. So if you take a look at this diagram or this icon, you know, we have this cube. And then on the right-hand side, you see that arrow, and then you see that there's, a bunch of little cubes that are broken out from there. So the way that applications were built back in the day was that they were developed out as one big monolithic application, is what they call it, right? So basically, you need to rewrite code, you need to rewrite the entire thing. If something didn't work, the entire thing didn't work. So what microservices architecture, it allows you to kind of, break up functions within an application specifically so that you can kind of, if something breaks, you can test and, fix that particular part. Maybe you want to improve certain parts without taking the entire, architecture down. So microservices has kind of, come to the market, has came to be as an enterprise solution, because it really allows you to stay organized. It allows you to be, highly maintainable, extremely testable, and independently deployable. And we're gonna kind of tie everything together and how that makes sense with blockchain, right? So here's blockchain. We'll get onto that in a second. And then obviously we have the cloud platforms like Azure, AWS, etc. What's interesting is there was a webinar that I watched from DevOps.com, and they were talking about some of the next gen technologies that corporates are adopting. And we have containers and microservices and Internet of Things, and blockchain is there as well. And what's interesting about this next slide, so this is a report from SolarWinds. And what they said is, okay, well, let's take a look at and let's interview all the technology skills that technology pros don't feel equipped with at this current moment. And if you take a look right here, blockchain is one of the top skill sets that these developers and these tech pros just don't feel comfortable with. And from us as a business and blockchain systems integrator, this is where executives are looking at, well, this is an emerging technology, and instead of spending all this time with learning and with training our own internal dev team when we have other initiatives, just go out and hire a blockchain systems integrator like Envision Blockchain that already has experience with deploying production environments, that has experience with developing out solutions while we're in this short emerging time frame. So the next couple slides, we'll talk about brief overview of blockchain. We're not going to go into too much of a 101, what is blockchain. If you're interested, if you go to our website, you see envisionblockchain.com/enterprise blockchain immersion. And then we also have Enterprise Blockchain Discovery Day. Those were the workshops that we were talking about. So just really quickly, we do like to provide a one-pager as to what is blockchain. It's a distributed ledger that has nodes in the network, and those nodes hold a copy of the ledger. It's an immutable chain of historical records. So anything that happens in a blockchain will stay in a blockchain forever. And they're typically programmed with smart contracts. So some of the values that you'll see from implementing a blockchain solution include immutability of data, transparency, real-time workflows, and these values provide a new level of trust between business parties. When we talk about industry use cases, you can see some of the boxes on the left. These are the particular industries that Envision Blockchain has some experience with. I just really like that infographic on the right-hand side. You could see I put it out on Instagram the other day. It kind of showcases some of the some of the specific use cases within some of these industries. Again, blockchain is being talked about as a disruptor that's allowing businesses to provide innovation and interaction in a brand new way. So let's break down blockchain applications and let's deconstruct it, and let's talk about exactly what makes up an end-to-end blockchain solution. So at the very basic level, at the very ground floor, we have our blockchain network. This is our Ethereum network. This is our Hyperledger Fabric network. This is our Corda network. This is the Bitcoin network, etc. And on top of that, we have our smart contracts. This is what you use to program how you interact with the blockchain network. Typically, somewhere in the middle between smart contracts, You would have a line of business application, say an ERP system, say a database or containers, all right? And then on top of everything, we have a user interface. It could be a web app, it could be a mobile app, etc. And this is our entire end-to-end solution. So how we interact with blockchain technology, let's break it down one step further. You typically start with your blockchain network, right? This is our depiction of a blockchain network with 6 nodes in it. And on top of that, you program the smart contract, just like the slide before that showed. And if we break it down even one step further, you develop your smart contract. It's codified business logic. It's a code that application users, they interact via a user interface, maybe a web or mobile application. And all those transactions that happen on that user interface, or whichever pieces of this business process or whatever pieces of these transactions you want to store in your blockchain ledger, you go ahead and you store it in your blockchain. Now, folks typically ask us, what is a blockchain system integrator and what does blockchain system integration do? So we can take you through a whole data flow of how something like that works. You take a look into your own business and this will probably make sense. You typically start with some sort of ERP system, or maybe, we're not talking about a use case right now, but let's just put it out here that the use case is what you want to do is you want to start with an ERP system. And anything that enters the ERP system, you want to be able to put some of that to the blockchain ledger. So the ERP system, something gets added to it. There's an integration service that funnels data to, let's say, a database. Maybe that's SQL, right? Then that information gets staged. It gets all the different relationships gets ties together. You have different staging tables. You have a master table that hits another integration service. From that integration service, you may have a microservice that is maybe a blockchain adapter that then feeds information to a blockchain ledger. Once it feeds information to a blockchain ledger, the blockchain ledger then writes information back to this microservice, then it feeds information back to this integration service, and then finally that information is then written to the user interface of your choice. Now, when we talk about these modern cloud solutions, your blockchain adapter or your microservice that's built with these microservice architecture, and same thing with your web application. And we were talking about Docker containers, all the different nodes of your blockchain on the right-hand side, those could be individually containerized within Docker. And same thing with your microservice could also be held within a Docker container, and your user application as well. And on top of all that would be the Kubernetes services, which orchestrates the communication between all of these different containers. You can host your entire solution, everything that we just showed you, in a cloud platform like Azure, AWS, and probably you're going to be using DevOps to be able to, develop these out and build it out and test it out. So I know we're running short on time, but we'll get to the real life blockchain application implementation considerations, and we'll try to go through these pretty quickly and save some time for some questions. So when we're talking about smart contract development, there's a lot that needs to be considered, but we're going to try to make this pretty easy to understand. So developers, they typically start by developing with a local copy of whatever code on their own computer, right? They're running their local tests. Whenever the code is done, they want to be able to then submit a pull request. Okay. That is all part of your build pipelines. So remember I was telling you about the continuous integration and continuous deployment, and you have these build pipelines and release pipelines. Well, you can use certain tools to help you out with that. And for example, Azure DevOps is one of them. And there's a white paper that I showed on the previous slide. There's a link to a GitHub that Microsoft released in their Azure Blockchain Development Kit. And in that development kit, there's a white paper that talks about DevOps and blockchain. So I'm going to use some of the screenshots from there. Just it's going to help explain. So for example, when we're developing out, right, and we want to go ahead and we want to submit a request, we can then submit a request, but before, you know, somebody approves it, for example, it's got to run through these automated build pipelines, right? So here you could see that it's going through the different progressions. We have deployments, we have test succeeded, build pipeline succeeded, etc. So by using this infrastructure as code, you can now automate these build pipelines so that you don't have to manually build your own blockchain network, test the smart contract function, you know, push it that way. So one code, one push does it all. Same thing is when you're ready to release it. Okay, so as you are developing your smart contract, here's a major consideration to think about, right? So we're talking about blockchain networks. And when you want to test your smart contract, it's very important that you need to know what blockchain you're testing it on. So for example, if you're testing it on Ethereum blockchain, you may want to fork that blockchain. And a fork means that you're making kind of like a split at a particular block height. And that's a copy, that's like an exact copy of that previous blockchain. So therefore, a popular use case is that you fork an Ethereum blockchain, if Ethereum is going to be the blockchain network of your choice. And then you can use your forked blockchain as your test environment, and then the original one is your production, or vice versa. However, what if you're using something like Hyperledger Fabric, where forking is not allowed? So therefore, you're going to need to understand if you are using a multi-org organization or a single org organization with regards to the Hyperledger Fabric build out. And therefore, you know, you can develop a script that it launches that exact copy of whatever the environment looks like. And then you put that as part of your infrastructure as a code for the release pipeline, okay? But in this example, just to kind of talk about what is in this build pipeline that we see in the screenshot, there's a popular Ethereum blockchain testnet, if you will, test blockchain called Ganache. So this right here, whenever you want to release your code into a, let's say, a test environment or a production environment, you can run these different pieces. For example, we're deploying an Azure App Service that you could see with my cursor right here. This is your Ganache test blockchain. Once your smart contract works on this test blockchain, then we can extract the files, and then we can run another PowerShell script that's going to deploy that particular smart contract to the blockchain. Why this is super important is because we don't want to just, you know, have to build these tests all over again. When you're releasing to a particular type of environment, this sort of release pipeline really helps in automating this process. And last but not least is microservices design. So when you're developing your smart contracts, if you think about an entire business process, right? If this happens, then that happens. And then if that happens, then that happens. And this could go on for, I don't know, you know, it can go on for a long time. What you can do is you can now break up these functions into smaller smart contracts, or break up these functions into a microservices design, so that you can have certain smart contracts trigger other smart contracts. That way, when one of these smart contracts fail, the rest of the application works, as opposed to being able to work out your entire smart contract from scratch again. A couple slides here, so just bear with me over here. Consortium Governance. This is important because when we're dealing with private blockchain, a consortium blockchain, you're now not just dealing with yourself or your business, now you're dealing with a couple other businesses that could be part of your business network, so to say. So it's important to think about who is involved and who can write code and who can approve code, right? So typically in a consortium environment, you may have somebody like Envision Blockchain managing that entire infrastructure. So there could be, say, 10 different businesses working together on one consortium, and then you have Envision Blockchain in the middle that's writing the code, and this could be set within the governance, you know, the governance framework, the governance contracts, if you will. But what happens if these consortiums decide not to use one person, but they decide to assign specific members of their organization to develop code? They all work together. So how can you do this? So obviously with certain tools like Azure DevOps, for example, is one of them, you can now create these branch policies. So anyone could write code and anyone could submit it, but it has to follow a very strict governance. So maybe in order for code to be pushed through, everyone needs to be on the same page and everyone needs to be able to approve it. So just to show you one more screenshot of how something like that could look like, one of the policies could be like it's required to have at least one reviewer or approved, or in our example, when we had 10 of these consortium members, maybe 10 reviewers are required. And they are, it's not just enough to review it, you also need to approve it. And then here is where you can see that the work items, remember we mentioned like in the agile world, you have your little sticky notes. Well, this is where you can link your work items to this actual, code pull request that you're looking at. And we see down here, now you have some sort of traceability and accountability. You could see that Johnny over there approved it. So all the consortium members can rest assured, if you're using the right technology and the company that you're hiring to do this sort of infrastructure build out can facilitate this sort of technology for you, you can now rest assured that governance is under control. Testing is super important because, like we mentioned with immutability, when you're testing information in a blockchain, it stays in the blockchain forever, right? So it's important for you to understand what you're testing, why you're testing, where you're testing, when you're testing, and how you're going to be testing. We could start at testing a blockchain just at the very ground level. One of the services that we provide to our customers is parallel testing of multiple blockchains. So for example, we provide to one of our customers parallel testing of Quorum, Ethereum, and Hyperledger Fabric. And we performed all sorts of stress testing, load testing, performance testing to help understand based on their business requirements what makes sense, right? You may not need to have, 2,000 transactions per second. Your business process may just require for you to have just, one transaction for every 24 hours is enough, depending on what you want to be captured within the blockchain. Well, we help out with that, and it's important to understand why you're testing it. So obviously then where is the test data going to be going? Are you leveraging an ERP system? Are you going to be doing a sandbox environment of that ERP system? Again, since the test data needs to be test data and that's just that, it's important to think about the blockchain that you're testing it with. You don't want to test your data on a production blockchain because then that test data is going to stay in that blockchain forever, obviously, right? So when we're running through our continuous integration and continuous deployments, when we're doing our build pipelines and release pipelines, we need to be able to automate the testing on the right blockchain that's going to make sense for testing purposes. And this is the main reason why we're talking about this as a real life consideration. And last but not least, we have environments, right? So again, we don't want to overcomplicate things. Blockchain is no different from a development perspective with some pretty serious implications, but no different than any other sort of application out there, right? You're developing. You still have your local build, you still have your test build, and then you have your production build. It's just important for you to take away that you can automate the testing and the releasing to these different environments. So remember I was telling you about the build pipelines and the release pipelines. A developer will typically start with the local build, like we were saying. And then when they're ready to deploy it, you can actually point that deployment to go either into your test or your production. Again, we recommend to start with the test. And the test is typically, the test environments are not going to last forever. They're not permanent. They're going to be able to be destroyed. You're going to want to break them. And when you break them, now you understand where the features are, where the opportunities to fix them are. But again, it's really important to understand that you typically move from the local build to the business consortium test build to the business consortium production build. And again, this production environment typically is going to be permanent when we're dealing with the blockchain environment. So please take that into consideration. So I know that we went through that pretty quickly and we went about 10 minutes over. I do appreciate everyone for staying past those extra 30 minutes. I'm going to open up the line for any questions or next steps. Obviously, some of the next steps are, if you're interested to understand what blockchain could do for your business, if you understand to learn how it would look like, or even just what blockchain is, we definitely recommend to go to our website, go check out the workshops. We have a Blockchain 101, we have a use case ideation, we have a blockchain discovery day. And the blockchain services, I mean, everything I was talking about relates to helping you out with a proof of concept build and then continuous MVP development. So thank you again. I really appreciate the time, and I'll open up for any questions.